There we go. I hope everybody can hear me okay. Hello, my name is Sarah Riche. I'm the species at risk biologist at the RBG. And today we are going to talk turtles. And primarily I want to focus a bit on, which ones we have around here and how it is that you can help with their conservation. Now, I'm going to touch upon what a species at risk is, why is it that turtles are at risk, what turtles do we have in this area, what specifically is RBG doing, how you can help, and I'm going to start that off with the species at risk official definitions, and hold rolling your eyes here because I know definitions are boring, but what I still regularly do get people asking me, what exactly does it mean species at risk? Well, it means any naturally occurring plant or animal that's in danger of disappearing from any area forever, in danger of extinction, in danger of disappearing. And of course, there's different ranks or different statuses of at risk. There's, of course, different ways to explain this, but I'll use the analogy of human health. For example, you see a person who appears healthy, you're sitting down to a meal with them, they look perfectly fine. They are not at risk because to your knowledge, they are healthy. Special concern is about the equivalent of someone clutching at their chest. Let's say that person who's clutching at their chest is heavy set, and maybe they're a heavy smoker and they look like they're having problems breathing, and it could be heartburn or it could be a heart attack. Now, creatures that are special concern are generally designated as such because there are life history traits that might make them more susceptible to becoming a species that could become threatened. Threatened species are species that are at risk of becoming endangered if something is not done. And that would be about the equivalent of unresponsive on the floor. So you had someone clutching at their chest and now they've collapsed. Okay, it's not heartburn. There's something serious going on and something needs to happen. And then of course there's endangered, which means the organism is in danger of becoming extirpated or extinct unless something drastic is done. And that's about the equivalent of, say, someone who is now coding en route to the hospital and they have paramedics working on them. I'm using this as an analogy, by the way, because my father survived a heart attack back in 2017, and it was knowing how things unfolded, the analogy works. Now, extirpated is more actually of it can be a political designation. It can also be more of a geographic designation. For example, a creature that's extirpated is, say, largely like black bears are largely extirpated from Windsor. They don't show up in Windsor. Black bear or porcupines are pretty much extirpated from Welland. To my knowledge, they don't regularly occur there. The timber rattlesnake is extirpated from Canada, but it still exists in the United States. And so on and so forth. So that's about the equivalent of flatlining. And so it's more of a localized extinction event, whereas extinct is permanent. There's no one doing that. The Przewalski's horse, for example, that's a Mongolian wild horse. That was made completely extinct in the wild and was only brought back into the wild because of captive breeding programs. So that was a very close call. But to illustrate the effects of extinct, of course, here I have two photos, one of which is the passenger pigeon and the other is the Eskimo curlew. The passenger pigeon was actually once one of the most numerous birds on Earth, and we wiped them out through various factors, and we do not get to witness them anymore on this Earth. And the Eskimo curlew, the last one was shot several decades ago. And there's no bringing them back. That's not just the dinosaurs and the dodo. It's something that's still ongoing today, even in our own backyards. And of course, extinct is something that can result from a series of localized extirpations. If something becomes extirpated from Halton region, and then it becomes extirpated from the Niagara Peninsula, and then it becomes extirpated from Long Point, and then it becomes extirpated from Windsor and the rest of Ontario, and then suddenly, well, now it's extirpated from Ontario, and then as the range can decrease, you'll end up with something becoming eventually extinct because the extirpation has removed any chance of the population from intermingling with other members of the population. So that's species at risk, and of course, various things make animals species at risk. Habitat loss, fragmentation, habitat encroachment, habitat degradation. This is a range map of the presumed maximum range at one point of the Massasauga rattlesnake, the more recent historical range, and then the current range. And to my knowledge, it might actually even be extirpated now from the Wainfleet Bog. And of course, while all wildlife is subject to horrible things to their habitat, reptiles especially are subject to these extra pressures that include things like poaching or smuggling for the illicit food and pet trade. And I don't just mean black market, I mean even Kijiji and Craigslist. They're also subject to things like being damaged by boat traffic or killed by boat traffic, off-roading, and of course, road mortality selects out a disproportionate amount of the breeding age adults out of a population. And then of course, there's even persecution. 2% of drivers were found to be hitting them purposely in a study conducted right here in Ontario along the Long Point Causeway. And there's of course issues with environmental contamination, especially in the Hamilton Harbour region. Mr. Shane DeSola of Environment Canada, Canadian Centre for Inland Waters, he conducted a study recently, I believe 2015, 2016, or 2017, and determined that the snapping turtles within Hamilton Harbour are essentially the most heavily contaminated turtles in all of the Great Lakes. There's also other types of environmental contamination, including invasive species, physical and chemical pollution, not just litter and garbage, but heavy metals and other toxins. And then, of course, there's also increased nest predation. Now, predation is a natural force. However, nest predators, especially turtle nest predators, are at massively inflated levels, especially in urban areas. Turtle nest predators like raccoons, skunk, possum, fox, coyote. These are all creatures that numbers are, if anything, they increase in an urban area beyond what is normally seen in undeveloped areas. And that's an extra pressure on the turtle nest. You can have 100% of turtle nests in an area being predated, and multiply that year after year over the course of several decades, and a turtle is unable to replace even itself. These photos here on this slide, I apologize that these are sad, but these were all taken right here at RBG. These were all adults that were otherwise healthy enough to breed, and they came up to land, which of course placed them at serious risk of harm, completely accidental harm by us, killed by a boat propeller, killed by a riding lawnmower, drowned by an ornamental water feature, hit by cars or construction equipment, or killed by improperly discarded garbage like tires and fishing line. And why is it that this is such an issue more so with turtles? Because if you were to compare them to other animals that are able to reproduce at a much earlier time in their existence and their lifespan, and of course, keep in mind, this chart does not actually take mortality into consideration, but loosely, you can have 2 moose turn into 681 moose over the course of 17 years. A deer, 2 deer can turn into 912 other deer over the next 17 years. A snapping turtle will finally reach sexual maturity and be able to lay its first clutch of eggs. And I've had snapping turtle clutches of eggs be as small as 12 eggs. I've also had some monstrous clutches that were clearly laid by much older individuals, but when you have so many things that are wiping turtles out before they're even able to reach breeding age, that makes that population or that organism so much more susceptible to population decline. And this photo here that was taken on York Boulevard shows that this beautiful female turtle, the snapper, had already survived an encounter with a vehicle. So these animals are tough, but of course they're not impenetrable. And when you multiply this effect over the course of just even our province or our own city, this is a death zone. And this really highlights the need for road mortality mitigation fencing that is appropriately, that is adequate, sufficient, and installed appropriately to be effective. And this picture doesn't even take into account things like private lanes and logging roads. So if turtles can't move safely across the landscape, where do we expect them to go? I bring up this photo because I also wanted to detail to people, there was a study published not long ago by some researchers that did a longitudinal study of a spotted turtle population that was in a protected area. And over the course of 30 years, using mark recapture techniques, they were able to determine that the spotted turtle population in that protected area declined by 50%, technically 49%, but I'm rounding up. They lost half of the population in 30 years. And there was also, that decline was also marked by an increase in the average size of individuals, which means that there was no young individual. There were no young individuals being recruited into the population. There was just the remaining old individuals that were still hanging on. But this was in a protected area. This was in a national or a provincial park, which means that having a protected area is insufficient for permanent conservation, especially if you have things like a road right beside that protected area. So a lot of people who think, oh, we're doing enough for the turtles, there's already a park for them, or there's already a wetland for them. Well, protected is a verb, it's not an outcome. It's something that needs to be done. There's ongoing actions and plans and strategies that need to take place for the protection to continue. Things are not protected because they're in a protected area, because animals don't know boundaries the way that we understand them. And speaking of boundaries, if I was to cheat a little bit and include the open water areas of Coote's Paradise of RBG and its wetlands, that would make RBG and its wetlands the largest non-developed area along Lake Ontario's western shoreline, all the way from Oshawa to Niagara Falls. So we're very fortunate that there's a single landowner for that area, because if that area was divvied up to hundreds of people in private homes, you are not going to get the same level of protection between all of that area. This really highlights that what we do, and I don't just mean we as an RBG, I mean we as in everybody, what we do or what we don't do has an impact. Especially when you consider turtle habitat is not confined to a wetland. Turtles do live in wetlands. They will live on occasion in ditches, in irrigation ponds, but they live and nest in the uplands. They cannot lay their eggs in water the way that amphibians do. They need to be able to reach dry land safely, lay their eggs, and then return to their home wetland safely so that they can lather, rinse, repeat the next year, or maybe the year after that. So if anyone here is looking at this map and saying, oh, I know where I live, I'm right around this area, and you notice that you're in one of those colored areas and you think, well, I've never seen a turtle there. Well, you just haven't seen a turtle there yet. There is, there's a number of occasions where I have had phone calls from various people who were surprised to find a turtle in their front yard, under their car. They had no idea why, because they didn't live close to, the marsh or a stream or a creek, but they did live pretty close to a ditch that eventually connected with another water body. So if a turtle wants to wander, it's going to go there. So you can encounter them anywhere, especially species like Blanding's turtles, which like to wander. And in general, you are going to encounter a turtle on land at some point in your life if it's not wintertime. As this chart summarizes that, according to the species, of course, June is when the activity levels peak for nesting, but because the species like the Midland painted turtle and the northern map turtle, when they lay their nests in June or July or late May, their young will hatch underground in the underground nest cavities, but they won't always emerge the same year that they were laid. So the young might hatch underground, but they might not emerge from the nest cavity until the following spring. They will spend the entire winter underground and then emerge maybe in April or May or June. And that's unpredictable. They've tried to figure out what it is that makes some of them hatch in the fall and some of them hatch or emerge, of course, in the spring. And the answer so far is a shrug. They're not certain. The northern map turtles actually so far seem to be spending about an average of 10 months underground. They are laid usually around June and July, and then they will emerge usually around April and May the following year. Now, snapping turtles and Blanding's turtles, their babies will emerge from the nest cavity the same year that they are laid. There is the occasional anecdotal report of babies successfully overwintering in the nest, and I have seen one instance of that myself, although the babies weren't doing so well because of a frost. But in general, if it's not winter, you can see a turtle on land. So in general, how are Ontario's turtles doing? Not great. We have 8 native species of turtle in Ontario, 8. 9 if you want to divvy up the painted turtle between the Western painted turtle and the Midland painted turtle, but people argue as to whether or not they count as 2 different species. And for now, when I say painted turtle, I mean the Midland painted turtle, because that is the subspecies or variety or whatnot that occurs in our area. And every single one of the native turtle species in Ontario are listed as at risk. Here at RBG, we have 4 that are remaining. So we have, like, historically, something tells me the spotted turtle was likely here, probably pre-European colonization, and we haven't found any evidence of them having been here. But the wood turtles did used to be in this area. Now they're endangered and they're gone. The eastern spiny softshell was last confirmed at RBG, I think it was 1984. And then there was the musk turtle, which we've only ever seen a single male, both this year, and the last time a single male was seen in 2009, and another time in I think 2002, and the time before that was 1998. So they're essentially considered functionally extirpated because there's been no breeding population confirmed. So we are now down to 4. And these were turtle species that were here in the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, and now they're not. It is happening that quickly. That's really quite fast, and especially in a turtle's lifespan. And what's worse is we now have irresponsible pet owners releasing their non-native red-eared sliders into the wetlands, which is just causing our dwindling native turtle species to compete with them for food and nesting spots and hibernation spots and basking spots. So of course we have the snapping turtle. These guys are one of my favorites. And yes, on the top left of that screen, that is a heart-shaped belly button. There's a point when they hatch out of their eggs and their yolk sac is healing, and there's a brief point where that yolk sac is heart-shaped, and I love capturing that moment. So because they have this reduced plastron, they don't have a shell that they can hide completely in the way that a painted turtle can. Because they can't hide, they've developed the snap defense. And they have a serrated rear shell. And as everyone knows, that awesome long tail with the stegosaurus spikes that makes them look like a dinosaur. The average carapace length is anywhere from 20 to 36 centimeters. But of course, we've got the occasional behemoths. I think the largest one that we've recorded at RBG was almost 42 centimeters, but that's extremely unusual. And of course, you can get some pretty hefty ones too, but I'm sure some of that's water weight and egg weight. But in general, 9 to 35 pounds. Now, of course, I also want to ensure that I state very clearly in a hopefully warm and reassuring tone to everyone here who has ever been in a water body where they didn't want to go swimming because there might be snapping turtles there, you're more likely to get hit by a piranha. They do not bite swimmers. They are defensive, they're not aggressive when they're encountered on land because you're a giant and you're approaching them and they assume you're going to eat them, so they are going to give you a run for their money. But generally, on land, if you leave them alone, they leave you alone. As long as they have an escape route, they'll take it. And when you encounter them in water, they will swim away. I am a scuba diver. I also snorkel, and I have been out in the marsh kneeling on what I thought was a rock that turned out to be a snapping turtle. I was kneeling because I was planting cattails, and all it did was swim away once I got off of it. They just want to be left alone. And it can take them almost up to 20 years before they're old enough to breed in Canada. And you may have seen broken eggshells on the ground before that look like they might have, just freshly been little ping pong balls. And those are the snapping turtle eggs. The eastern spiny softshell turtle also lays ping pong ball shaped eggs, but painteds and blandings and northern map, they lay oval shaped eggs. Now it's estimated about 1 egg from every 1,400 eggs laid will survive to adulthood. So that could take that snapping turtle up until the age of 50 before it has a chance of replacing itself. They are omnivorous. Usually actually up to 90% of what they eat is essentially carrion or dead decaying things and plants. And the rest of the other 10% is usually eaten opportunistically if it happens to swim in front of them, if that is a duckling or a gosling or a leech or a fish, or sometimes bait on the end of a fish hook, unfortunately. They are considered special concern. Now, the northern map turtle is also special concern, and it is referred to as the map turtle because the top of its shell, as you can see in the bottom picture there, had an ornate design that people felt was similar to the lines on a topographic map. And they have a nice ridge or keel on the top of their carapace, and also a serrated rear end of the carapace, like a snapping turtle. They prefer to eat mollusks, clams, mussels, and water bugs. And they generally prefer larger water bodies. You're not going to find them in a tiny little irrigation pond. You're going to more likely to find them in a large marsh, broad river, or lake. And the female is hilariously much larger than the male. On the top photo, taken by Kyle Vincent, he was my intern in 2017, that tiny turtle that is stealing some real estate on the top of that larger turtle, that is not a mother and her baby. That is an adult female on the bottom, the big one, and the adult male is on top of her stealing sunlight. That would make for a very awkward first date. Now, of course, there's our beloved painted turtles, and they are, of course, ubiquitous and gorgeous, and unfortunately also recently listed as special concern. And some people might get those mixed up with the red-eared sliders, but I want you to pay attention to the color of the mark behind the turtle's eye. The red-eared slider clearly has a red ear. It's not actually its ear, it's just a red mark behind its eye, but the painted turtle has yellow marks on its face. The red marks on the painted turtle are generally along the edge of the shell and on the legs and on the neck, but that mark behind the eye is yellow. And then, of course, there's the star of the show. These are my golden gals and guys, and these are the Blandings turtles. They are known for their yellow chin and neck, and I've had it explained to me by Anishinaabe people that they were referred to as the turtle with the sun under their chin. They're also renowned for having a very domed shell that is referred to as, it looks like kind of a helmet shape. And if you compare that to, say, a painted turtle, not quite the same shape. Even if they were the same size, they don't have quite the same shape. And painted turtles can also tend to be a little bit more flat. I don't know if anybody can see that here. I hope that you can. And that domed shell can really stand out sometimes on a log. They also have a hinged plastron, which means there's a seam on the underside of their plastron. It takes about 3 or 4 years for it to develop any level of flexibility. Interestingly, the flexibility varies per individual. You can have ones where the hinge is very stiff, and others where it's so flexible they can shut up the front of their shell and you can't see anything inside. And these guys are a completely benign, docile, harmless omnivore. They prefer crayfish. That's their chocolate. Also interesting, the plastron markings on the underside of their shell is as unique as a fingerprint. While those markings do slowly cover the plastron over time, it happens slow enough that when you're monitoring individuals, I can use those markings of the plastron to differentiate between individuals. And I know that if there's one I pick up and it's not notched, I can say, okay, well, that's Bruno or that's Nish. And the slow changes over time can eventually result in the plastron slowly being turned into complete black. Now, we have individuals in our population, one is named Shimmy, that we know for a fact is a minimum of 50 years old, and he still has a very open carapace, like the black marks haven't encircled his entire plastron. But then we have Bruno here on the bottom right, and he has quite a dark carapace, and he's also one of our largest individuals, and I have no idea how old he might be. For all I know, he's over 100. And they are threatened and endangered. Of course, there's different designations you can get between federal or Canada-wide versus provincial Ontario, different designations for Kosiwak or Kasaro. I also wanted to briefly discuss how to differentiate between the sexes of Blandings turtles, because very important information. Honestly, tuck this away somewhere important. So, of course, generally speaking, the male has a more concave plastron and the female has a flatter plastron. However, I have encountered, and many other people have encountered, that there are plastron variations that you'll get the occasional female who will have some concavity, and you'll get a male who is rather flat. So this is not a 100% reliable technique of differentiating between a male and a female. Well, what about their face? It turns out with adult specimens, generally speaking, the male face and the upper lip and his face are quite dark, solidly colored. Whereas the female, her upper lip and face tends to be yellow or to olive mottling on the face, almost kind of like stripes. However, not 100% reliable, because with subadults, especially the males, the faces can resemble the females. And there's 2 pictures there of one of our individuals, Squirt, in 2016, and Squirt had a very girl face. And then we encountered Squirt in 2020, and he had a bit of a black mustache that was starting to happen. And now here in 2022, he has a completely dark face. So even though his shell has not changed much in size during that time, his face rapidly changed from that of from a female or young male to a grown-up male. Males will also tend to have thicker tails. And the thing is, how reliable a trait is that especially when you're looking at one from a distance? Not to mention, we have 2 individuals that I know of in our population who are both missing huge portions of their tails, likely from predation. So that's also not a 100% reliable trait. Largely with Blandings turtles specifically, you want to look at their naughty bits, which seems a little pervy, but it's really the only 100% reliable, effective way to determine if the specimen is male or female. And you need them in hand, and you flip them over and you look at their belly. And if the cloaca is past the rear edge of the carapace, it's a male. And if the cloaca is at or under the rear edge of the carapace, that is a lady you have there. So I wonder if any of you have seen any Blanding's turtles around, especially at RBG. This log here has pictures of 2 Blanding's turtles. There's a Benjamino on the left and Squirt on the right. And there's also some painted turtles there for comparison. And you can see the painted turtle that's directly in the middle has a much more flatter shape, but there is kind of a domier shape to a adult female painted turtle here that can cause some confusion when people are looking at them from a distance. And then, of course, there's the confusion caused by the immatures or the juveniles that love to hide in places, seemingly in plain sight. But I wouldn't expect anybody to be able to pick out the Blanding's turtle in the log on this photo. In fact, the dozens and dozens of people I've shown this photo to, only one person has actually been able to pick it out. And something else I wanted to discuss with you, notching turtles. This is a worldwide practice that, while it causes a permanent mark on the turtle, it does not hurt them. So they're filed into marginal scutes, and each scute is assigned a particular letter or number, and that depends on what notching system you're using. I've seen notching systems that use only specific scutes, and I've seen notching systems that, you know, had to be paired with drilled rings, and I've seen notching systems that only use numbers and only the front or only the back, and it differed per species. Myself, the code that I use is called the North American code, and the reason it's called the North American code is because NA is at the top, North American. So these so the dorsal scutes go right down the middle. There's always generally 5, unless there's the occasional deformity. There's usually 4 lateral scutes, or also referred to as costal scutes. But then there are 12 marginal scutes on both sides, on the left and on the right. Now, on both sides, there are 3 scutes that are just not marked because they're too close to the plastral bridge, and you don't want to risk that. So E, F, G, and R, S, T are never notched, but we will always start at the front right, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, all the way down to L, and then from the top left, N, O, P, Q, R, S, all the way down to Y. And some people might think, well, genius Sarah, there's 26 letters in the alphabet, and I know this. The thing is, there are stinkpot turtles, which are called, also referred to as the kinosternid turtles, which only ever have 11 scutes on each, like 11 marginal scutes on their sides. So this system accounts for that, but it also provides wiggle room for those multiple individuals that we encounter of all species. All of our turtle species seem to, on occasion, have an extra marginal scute, sometimes only on one side and sometimes on both sides. And it's in those occasions that, if we have the opportunity, we will notch with the letters M or Z. And the code is generally always read alphabetically. And then, for example, you can see here, this one's code is AOXY. So we always start alphabetically reading from top to bottom, or from the right to the left. So this one's, because A was notched right here, and then we start again, O, X, and Y. You can have 1 scoot notched, you can have 2, 3, 4, 5, depending on where you are in your tally. Now, some of these notches, they could be triangular, or they can even be round, but they are always in the middle of the marginal scute. Now, I will get to why that is important to take note of in a moment. So they can be done at the front of the turtle, like right behind its head. They can occur at the rear, on either side. And of course, here's an example of a specimen that has 13 marginal scutes. So in this case, we were able to use the Z in this occasion. And because of turtles being curved, and because of things like algae and deformities and random shell damage, you know, that could obscure the notch code. So you can see, for example, because of the rear edge of this, the serrated rear edge of this snapping turtle, notching one of the scutes meant we were notching one side of a point. So that was not necessarily an easily seen one. And some of these notches are ones that I've done. Some of them are notches that past researchers have done. So frequently when we encounter turtles that appear to have notches, I always make sure to take more than one photo. I'd never just take a photo of one side of a turtle, because there could be notches on the other side, and I can't prove with one picture that that's the notch code of that turtle without looking at the entire turtle. And by the way, not every nick is a notch. For example, I'm going to start at the top left here. I hope you guys can see my cursor. This is a snapping turtle shell, and this is a northern map turtle shell. And both of them have natural serrations, which might look like notches when really that is a completely normal part of the rear edge of their carapace. Also completely normal is a lot of painted turtles will, like this scoot here is called the nuchal scoot. Nuchal is N-U-C-H-A-L. I don't know why I said that. That's completely useless information to you, but we don't generally count that scoot when we're counting marginal scoots. Every turtle has a nuchal scoot. And oftentimes there'll be these little notches in between the nuchal scoot and the first marginal on either the left or right. And those aren't notches. That's just a normal scalloping. And it's the same, you get the same thing here. This is one of the Blandings turtles we have, that's Benjamino. He has some natural scalloping on only one side of his carapace along the edge. There's these little divots in between his marginals, but not in the middle of the marginal where a notch would be. There's also what's called a caudal notch, C-A-U-D-A-L, which is, that's a word relating to tail. And this is sweet little Olive, and she's got a cute little caudal notch, and that's just a spacing that has opened up in between her two rear marginal scoots. And then there's Gonzo, and he has been through some stuff. He must have started some fights and been on the unfortunate end of a number of chases, because he has a fair bit of shell damage on his butt end. But none of these are notches. They are just shell damage, and none of them are very obvious notches in the middle of a marginal scoot. And then you get what can be either from shell damage from an injury, or this could even be congenital. We get turtles that are born without certain scoots. And this particular map turtle that was observed up in the Laking Garden is missing entirely its 11th scoot. So that's not a notch, that's a completely missing scoot. So sometimes, depending on the level of damage or the location of it, we might actually include a shell damage or a congenital issue within the notching code to help use up that notching code. And we use this information to track movements, because we can't put a transmitter on every turtle, and we still want to know where are they going, where they come from. Just this year alone, we determined there was a turtle that was found. It's a painted female turtle. Her code was ABV. She survived crossing Plains Road West, hopefully sometime in the middle of the night. She was found wandering around the reflecting pool at Hendry Park, and we notched her and we released her into Kippax Pond because she was gravid. She needed to lay eggs. We didn't want to bring her all the way back down to the marsh, because that's just doubling the distance she's got to travel. So we thought she'll hang out here for the day and she'll probably come up, lay her eggs, and then return to the marsh, sometime later that day. No, not at all. June 9th, she was seen right there and notched in Hendry Park. 2 days later, she was rescued from the just west of the staff parking lot area, looking like she was motoring. So at some point she had crossed the road over the course of 2 days, further highlighting the need for fencing along this area, which we have very recently gotten funding for, and I'm looking forward to proceeding with that. Another painted turtle female Q, she was seen June 2019 over here in South Pasture Swamp, and we found her nesting in the Valley Road region. 3 years later. Quite a distance for such a little girl. And we've also had snapping turtle IL, so code IL, and she showed up beside Undworth Ave 2 years later after she had been notched again in South Pasture Swamp. And snapping turtle HUV motored it between, over the course of 2 weeks, made it from South Pasture Swamp to nesting beside the road in Valley Inn. This was startling. I had suspected and expected that and assumed that any turtles in this area would probably just come up and nest in the park. No, some of them are completely leaving the upstream wetlands and marshes and moving down into the more open areas. And then of course there's ones that I was very sad I didn't get to know them for very long. Snapping turtle HY, I called her High. She had already survived a really nasty car wreck, and the shell damage highlighted that. And unfortunately, she was found dead, completely, hopelessly entangled underwater in improperly discarded fishing line, secured to a log down in the Valley Inn area. And then, of course, there's the the data that you would get from someone else's notching data. And some of you may have seen this story in the CBC recently, because we confirmed through notching, as well as the plastron marks, as well as the unique identifier of 2 missing feet, that Blanding's turtle Shimmy was actually kidnapped, turtle napped from Long Point. He was last seen in Long Point by researchers back in 2017. He had originally been notched, already missing his 2 feet, back in 1993. So, and back then he was already a full grown adult. So a minimum of 20 years, but they suspect it could have been 35 or 50 at that point. And he was seen here by one of RBG's volunteers in the Hendry Valley area around 2012. And I only knew that from a photograph. And then I finally had him in hand in 2017 and confirmed that, yeah, that's him. And through reaching out on a Facebook group for herpetologists, we confirmed that Shimmy walked all the way from Long Point to Hamilton with only 2 feet. I'm kidding, obviously, clearly he did not make it that far. That's not how far Blanding's turtles wander in that long a period of time. They do wander, but not like that, not all the way along Lake Erie's North Shore, through the Welland Canal, and down along the north side of Niagara Peninsula. He was turtle napped by someone who thought that something in the wild was cute, and that meant they got to keep it. And then maybe they either got tired of looking after him, or they realized, oh my God, I've got an endangered species that I'm keeping as a pet, and that's not right. And they irresponsibly released him into a marsh that was at RBG. And I know that I'm preaching to the choir by saying that here, but for the sake of me being able to say I said it, please don't move turtles between wetlands. Now, the way that I keep track of our Blanding's turtles here at RBG is with kind of a lookbook that I use to help differentiate between some of the individuals, especially from a distance. There are some of them have notches or unique deformities, and as well as transmitters, of course, that we attach to the females. And that way, when someone sends me a photo, I'm able to refer to this lookbook and find out, well, you know, does this notch or does this marking match with what we know of? And is this a new individual, or is this one that we know of? And I wanted to thank everybody out there who has a fancy camera, and I would love to beg you, please, if you ever take a photo of a Blanding's turtle anywhere in the Hamilton area, I would love for you to please send me those photos, because those fancy cameras, man, they can pick up some detail. This was a photo, the photo on the bottom left there is a photo from a visitor named Jeanette Q, and she sent me these photos very generously and asked if I could give her any information on it. And of course, yes, I can, because these photos were detailed enough, even though this turtle isn't notched, even though this turtle does not have a transmitter on it, the detail in this photo was enough for me to confirm that this is Benjamin O. He is, that was a male. He is known to us. He was named by my predecessor, I believe. And this was fantastic because where she observed him was completely new movement behavior for him. And I say completely new because even though it could be old and he could be doing it every year, because I have no transmitters on the males, I don't know where they go. The transmitters are expensive, and we essentially keep them on the females so that we can track them to their nesting sites and protect their nest and keep the female safe while she is up on land. But with the males, generally I'll see them basking typically around April, May. But outside of that, I don't tend to get much information on them. So it was wonderful to get news that showed me that he's actually utilizing far more of the area's wetlands than was previously thought. And that does bring me a lot of questions. Is it that the spot that he was in is not suitable? Is he looking for a female? Is he searching out for more food? Is he going to be leaving the wetland and finding a new home base? Now, of course, at RBG, we have a site-specific turtle recovery plan. Some of you may have heard of this, some of you might not have. This is a multifaceted plan it's multi-pronged, and it is to tackle the multiple issues that are affecting our area's turtles. That includes, but is not limited to, things like education and stewardship, improving habitat quality, reducing adult mortality, and increasing recruitment rates. Now, of course, I do all of this under the auspices of permitting authorities. There's a number of permits that I apply for in order to do this work, not just legally, but correctly, because that way, if someone ever approaches me saying, are you sure you're doing that right? Are you allowed to be doing that? I'm able to say, you know what, I have an approved Wildlife Animal Care Committee protocol that states that what I am doing is actually perfectly safe for the animal and myself. Now, the work that we've been doing with everything, and that's not just the Natural Lands Department, by the way, that is all of RBG, that is it's the contractors, it's our neighbors, it's our fellow not-for-profit partners, it's visitors, it's staff and volunteers, and everyone reaching out and in to tackle all those multiple prongs of conservation, the education and the stewardship, reducing adult mortality, increasing recruitment rates, improving habitat quality, planting freshwater marshland plants into the wetland is one of those things that is crucial, because as much as people want to, save the nests and protect the babies, ultimately, if you don't take care of the habitat and you don't protect the adults, you will run out of babies and nests to protect. So the true focus needs to be on saving the adults and the habitat and protecting and improving the habitat. And some of the highlights of those efforts include 99 turtles in 2021 being relocated from unsafe areas to safety. And those are just the ones I know about. Those are just the ones that people report to me. And that doesn't even include Dundas Turtle Watch's stats. And if you were to look at those numbers, because I keep track of who tells me what and who those people are they staff? Are they visitors, volunteers? Are they city workers? Are they campers? And it turns out, on average, and last year was no exception, 80 to 90% of the turtles that are rescued from unsafe areas were first found and or reported and or rescued by people other than myself or my assistant. So the Natural Lands Species at Risk team is me and one other person. I get a different intern each year. I'm very fortunate to get that. This year, for the first time ever, I got to have a summer student, which was spectacular. All the more hands especially during peak nesting season. And that last year, I didn't have a summer student last year, but last year we still protected 59 nests. And of those 59 nests, 80% of them were found first and reported by people other than me or my assistant, which means I would be 20% as effective if it was just me or just me and my assistant. The success of the program is reliant upon not just me. You guys are 80% of the success of this program. Other notable highlights, because other people reached out, not actually to me, but I can tell you the brief story of this because this blows my mind. There was apparently some kayakers or canoers, I didn't get all of the information, who found 2 Blandings turtle babies right beside each other in the West Coots area of Spencer Creek. And I'm using air quotes because I was given pretty generic location information. And they brought those hatchlings, and these were brand spanking new hatchlings. They still had their egg teeth. They brought those hatchlings to Jarvis, where there is the Hobbit's Tea Wildlife Refuge with Chantel Fain, who saves, I think, anywhere from over 80 to 90 turtles a year, like how many she is medically treating because of damage generally by garbage and vehicles and fishing debris. And they brought them to her, and she gave me a ring saying, hey, I know that you do Blandings turtle work. Are you interested in these? I said, my dear, sweet Lord Jesus, yes, I am interested in those. And we promptly brought them up to the Georgian Bay Turtle Hospital, which is run under the same umbrella as Scales Nature Park up in the Aurelia area, because we had only very recently obtained funding in order to help provide for the supplies and resources necessary to keep these guys head started. Head starting, of course, meaning that they were going to be taken care of safely in captivity. They were going to be fed and housed until for 2 years, by which time they would be about the same size as what might take a hatchling in the wild 4 or 5 years to achieve. And then we would release them. So they're at a size that's much harder for something like a frog or a bird to swallow. They're not completely out of the woods yet. They're still potentially vulnerable, but it helps lift them out of that extremely vulnerable stage. And fortunately, of those 2 hatchlings, one of them survived. And those of you who are familiar with one of your other employees, Brittany Killingbeck, she was my intern last year, and she had the honor of naming sweet Nigani, which is an Anishinaabe word for he or she leads or goes forward. So Nigani was released into Coots Paradise this year. It is the first head-started Blandings turtle ever released into Coots Paradise or any of RBG's wetlands or the area's wetlands outside of Rouge Park ever. So a huge thank you to Georgian Bay Turtle Hospital and Scales Nature Park. And by the way, if anybody amongst you here in the audience is aware, are those people who found those babies or is aware of who those people are, please, if you could put them into contact with me. I'm not looking to get anybody in trouble. I just want to find out where, because Blandings turtles especially, generally speaking, have very high nest site fidelity. So they tend to return to the same area. And if there is indeed another breeding female Blandings turtle in Coots, that is poop my pants excitement, because to my knowledge, we only have one. We've only got Seneca in all of Coots. And that's horrifying to think that we're down to one female. And I'd like to protect that other one's nest as well if we can find her and get a tracker on her. Now, it's not just the tracking that we do. We, of course, track the Blandings turtle females to their nests in order to protect their nests. And the other turtle species that nest on RBG property, we will also protect their nests. And that generally includes covering the nest, relocating the nest in order to cover it, or relocating it in order to collect it and incubate it. And when we determine whether or not we cover a nest or when we retrieve it, depends on where that nest was laid. For example, on the bottom left, you can see that snapping turtle was laying in an active construction site. Clearly, putting in a nest cover was not going to help. There were going to be tractors and excavators and pavers that was going to destroy the nest. So in that case, we just retrieve. And then there's other instances where, even though it's a perfectly safe spot to place a nest cover, the substrate itself is not firm enough to hold the ground staples in the ground to secure the nest cover. It's too loose, things like roadside gravel or a mulch pile. Or it might be an area like on the bottom right, that was a baseball diamond that a snapping turtle nested at in Churchill Park. And clearly putting in a nest cover there is not going to be effective. I might just make children trip over it. And even if they don't trip over it, they'd be crushing it with their feet while trying to play baseball. So not a spot where a nest cover is going to be an effective solution. Now, if you're ever wandering around RBG's properties or adjacent to RBG's lands, you might encounter turtles on land, and they might be really easy to see. Guys like snapping turtles are not that great at hiding. Predated nests are generally the first thing we see that would even let us know a nest was ever built there. We record more predated nests each year than we do non-predated nests, generally because a lot of nests can sometimes be laid overnight and then they are predated before we even get to work in the morning. You may also be wandering around our gardens and you might see a snapping turtle making a mess. As much as the rose garden folks love that, they might be digging a nest, right next to a walkway. Or they might be super hard to see, because a lot of times when turtles leave the wetlands, they come up, early morning perhaps, and then suddenly it gets too hot for them to safely be outside in the sun, and they need to keep from overheating. So they will bury themselves and hide themselves in anything, waiting until later on in the day when things cool off, and then they'll come out, nest, and return to the wetlands. And these are photos I've taken at RBG where there was a snapping turtle there on the right. You can see just the tail poking out from underneath a compost pile. And another turtle there on the left that buried itself into some loose dirt in order to keep itself from overheating. I also wanted to challenge anyone to see if they could see the hatchling in this photo. I'll give you the count of 3, 2, 1. How about now? Can you still see the hatchling? 3, 2, 1. How about now? So it's right just there on the middle left of the photo. That's the little painted turtle hatchling. Now, what about here? And I could understand a hatchling being very difficult to see. They're tiny. They've evolved to not be seen. But Carmen, one of our endangered Blandings turtle females, can you guess where she is in this photo? It doesn't look like there's a lot of vegetation cover. Your eyes would immediately scan over this and assume that if there is a turtle present, it would be visible, yes? How about now? And how about now? And still, there's the top of her shell. Carmen, I should rename her to Horseshoe Up Butt, because she very narrowly missed getting killed by excavators removing compost material. Obviously, we have since changed our compost management practices in this area for this exact reason. And Carmen was there without our knowledge because that sneaky little minx had dropped her tracker. So she left it behind somewhere in the marsh, and so we didn't know where she was. It's one of the reasons why I want to find out where those plantings are so I can get trackers on them to keep them safe. Because this list of our Blandings turtle female, since I started in 2016, if it wasn't for direct interference because of the trackers, we would have lost 4. That's half of our adult female population of Blandings turtles. We cannot afford to lose that. Callie would have been killed by a car because I snatched her off of the road just as she was stepping off of the curb onto Plains Road West. Emily, she likely would have died buried and trapped somewhere in the back of the Hendry barn behind a bunch of equipment because she had wandered in there while the door was open. And that's a large metal building that's not air conditioned. She likely would have overheated. Lola would definitely have died of dehydration or hypothermia. She fell sideways in behind a landowner's shed and in between their neighbor's fence and a deck where some lids and toys had fallen between, so she was completely pinned sideways. Unfortunately, we had been monitoring her daily at that point. It took a while for us to find her, but she would have died if she hadn't been retrieved. And Seneca would have gotten smucked either by a riding mower or a train because she seems to have a death wish and loves to wander along the train tracks looking for a place to nest. So 4 of them would have been lost if we didn't know where they were. And it's a shame that it's gotten to the point that we need to monitor them to prevent this from happening. And I'd love to be able to retire knowing that their population here has been buoyed out of this danger zone. Now, because nests can be tricky to find, this is where you guys come in. On the left, top left and bottom left, there's a snapping turtles. Because they lay so many eggs, they have a much harder time hiding the evidence of their nest. Guys like map turtles and painted turtles and Blandings turtles, they leave little to no evidence of their nest behind. If it wasn't for this photo of this map turtle, which I have cropped because I didn't want to give away its location, I would not have known where this nest was. I've had people send me pictures of turtles and they only include a photo of the turtle, but not the turtle in the landscape. So I don't know where it is because they'll send me a photo of a painted turtle saying, oh, it was beside this trail. And I ask them, beside that trail, that's a lot of area. You know, a painted turtle nest is smaller than my fist. I'd have to dig up the entire trail to know where that is. And I have gotten some very interesting directions to nest that I couldn't follow up on, but thank God for the advent of smartphones. So because nests can be tricky to find, and also, by the way, I have permit requirements. I am legally required to report what species, where, when was it seen, who saw it, what was done, was it nesting, did you protect the nest, did you retrieve it, did you find it already predated? Because nests are hard to find, because these turtles numbers are not doing so great, because we have this plan in place, I need your help. I need the what, the where, the when, and the who. And that includes things like your name, because you're the who. The what includes, what is it, a live turtle, a dead turtle? Is it a turtle on a road, on a trail? Is it digging in a garden? Is it burrowing into your backyard? What's it up to? So if you have very vague information, things like, I saw some kind of turtle the other day on land over there, I can do nothing with that information. I've gotten reports like, oh, we found a bunch of baby turtles in the parking lot on the weekend and released them. And my answer to that would be, who is this? How much is a bunch? 10, 5, 3? Baby turtles, what kind? Do you have any photos? So I know, were they painteds? Were they snappers? Were they baby map turtles? What parking lot? There's many parking lots in the area. On the weekend, which day? The weekend is at least 2 days. And you released them. Where? Where did you release them? There's information missing in all of those reports, but the fantastic reports are things like, hey, it's Gardener Charlie Briggs. There's a turtle that just walked off a mulch pile at this specific place. I've put 2 pylons on either side of where it was sitting on the pile. So it was probably nesting. Boom, I've got the who, Charlie Briggs. I got the when, just now, I just walked off the pile. He gave me the place and he put 2 pylons on either side of it. It's gonna make it way easier for me to get there and find whatever it is I'm looking for. And I have the what, like, by the way, it doesn't even show what turtle, but like, you don't have to know your turtle species. It's helpful to know them, but you'll see all these examples of the more helpful examples. None of these people included the type of turtle. That can be helpful, but at the same time, pictures might be able to be enough to fill in that gap if you're not comfortable with identifying the 8 turtle species of Ontario. But if you aren't comfortable identifying the 8 species of turtles in Ontario, I will urge you to learn them. There's really only the 4 or 5 that you get in this area, and 8 overall that are native. And I guarantee you would probably be able to list at least 10 people's names and 10 pop songs or 10 nursery rhymes or 10, ways to cook eggs. It's a very reasonable number to learn. And finding out where you've had your information, your observation, also super helpful to us, because then I'm able to aggregate that information. I compile that at the end of the year, and I have a look and see what patterns are available. How can we respond to these patterns? Are there areas that we could install a nesting pile? Are there areas that we need to focus on, working with the city to install more wildlife roadkill mitigation fencing, etc. And other things that are less helpful are things like hearing about every turtle seen in the water. That's great that you saw a turtle in the water. That's generally where you'll see turtles. Unless it's a Blandings turtle, I don't really need to hear the report of it, because the turtle is perfectly fine and it doesn't require any assistance or interference. Also less helpful is if you send me a 20-minute video that you took of all the different angles of a turtle while it was trying to dig a nesting cavity because you wanted to get as much detail as possible. Because later on, after you left, that turtle abandoned that nesting cavity because you were harassing it, even though you didn't mean to, you didn't know you were. It doesn't know that you don't mean it any harm. So generally, if you need to get some data on a turtle, quick photographs and then getting out of there and leaving it alone to do its thing is the best thing for it. Of course, unless it's in a spot that's not exactly safe for it to be in. And of course, I would urge you never pick up a turtle while it's nesting. If you don't know what a nesting turtle looks like, generally they kind of are squatting with their butt in the ground, and they will be often either alternating with their legs one by one. And as they alternate, they could either be digging that nest or filling in the nest, or even reaching in to rearrange the eggs within the nest cavity. What is more helpful, of course, is picture and location. Thank you to all of the smartphone users, because you immediately have all the tools you need in your hand. There's a number of free apps that you can use to dictate the exact location. There's things like Google Maps. There's things like photos that you can just send. There's WhatsApp. There's, share your location on a number of other apps. There's things like What 3 Words, which will give a 3-word code for any 3 meter by 3 meter square of area that anywhere in the world. And these are all things that are available with smartphones. I know that smartphones are expensive though. So I've had people give very detailed information with photographs and emails and descriptions, and especially when they marked the spot in situ, like on the land, oftentimes with, a pile of rocks or twigs. And if I hear about turtles on land at and around RBG, I'm always excited to hear about turtles in other areas. However, my permits only allow me to conduct these turtle conservation activities on and immediately adjacent to RBG land. If I have someone calling me from Grimsby to come and retrieve a turtle nest in their backyard, legally I cannot do that, but I can maybe try to work with that person to get them a nest cover that might protect the nest from predation. If I hear about nesting turtles, like turtles on land in general, nesting turtles, of course, we're past nesting period. So you're not likely to see adult turtles on land to nest, although you are still likely to see them on land as they move about in the fall, now that they are moving back to some of their overwintering sites. Although some turtles will hopefully be safely already in their overwintering site, because maybe they just hang out in the same large body of water year round. So if there's turtles that you suspect are nesting around RBG, that would typically be May, June, July. And if I hear even about predated nests at or around RBG, some people feel disheartened when they think that they've come across a predated nest because they think, oh no, it's already too late to do anything. Not true. Actually, because of a pile of records of predated nests that had been reported immediately on land, immediately adjacent to RBG, and it was on McMaster property, we were able to work with the University of McMaster to ensure that when there was construction work going on around a particular site on their campus, that they put in specific measures in place to prevent any turtles from getting hurt on the property. And what ended up happening was we retrieved over 12 nests and 7 adults were saved from unsafe situations. So because we knew that turtles had been there, even though the nests had been predated already, we still had record that proved they were going up there to nest. So and that resulted directly in keeping individual specimens safe and retrieving nests, which again, that's part of reducing adult mortality and increasing recruitment. And even if you come across a turtle that you think, oh no, I'm not going to bother reporting this, the turtle's dead, I can't save it at all, doesn't matter. It's the same thing with the predated nest. We still want that information because that shows us maybe there's fencing that needs to go there, or maybe there's fencing that's already there that might have a hole, might be broken, which has occurred. We've had reports where there were turtles getting hurt in a particular spot, and I thought, well, we put up fencing there last year, what happened? And we went there and it turns out somebody had vandalized the fence and we were able to get it repaired. And also, of course, super helpful is when you educate others on how else they can help. And one of those things that I'm going to do to educate you on is what to do if you come across an injured or what you suspect is a sick turtle. I want you to immediately call animal services. And of course, it depends if it, Burlington versus Hamilton Animal Services, depending on where you are. But there's also the Dundas Turtle Watch Crisis Line. They monitor so much of the turtle activity that is occurring over at the west end of Coutts Paradise. And they also have volunteers that have taken the basic triage courses that will help get that, if you bring that turtle to them, and they will get that turtle they will get it triaged, hydrated, and sent off to a vet for pain management and medical care. And for anyone who might not have already seen this, I would like to discuss with you saving turtles on the road. It is one of the best things you can do for a turtle that is in immediate distress on the road. Well, it might not know it's in distress, but I'm going to go over, I'm going to include this video that was made in partnership with the OMNRF and Toronto Zoo with the Adopt a Pond program. It is a 3-minute video, 3 minutes, that's it. It takes more time to go to the bathroom. In literally less time than it takes for you to pee, you can learn how to save a life. Watch this video on YouTube. If you're going to zone out now, I'm going to play it for you. If you need to go and grab a drink or whatnot, or you can save yourself the time of doing it later by just doing it now and have a listen. If you don't hear all of the sound quality, it's dubious at times, but in general, follow these instructions.
Hi, we all know what a big impact roads have on wildlife, and turtles in particular. And we all want to help turtles cross the road so that they don't get hurt. But one of the biggest questions that we get at Adopt a Pond is, how do you help a turtle across the road? The first thing that you want to keep in mind is that you always help a turtle across the road in the direction that it's heading. Now the next big question is, how do you help a large snapping turtle like this one across the road when they can be very insecure on land, very defensive, and not know that you're trying to help them out and potentially try to bite you? First thing you want to do is make sure that you never ever grab a turtle by the tail and pick it up this way. The turtle's vertebrae, or its spine, which is fused to the underside of its shell, runs through its tail. If you were to pick a turtle up by its tail, you could literally dislocate its spine and hurt it quite badly. Also, you never want to try and pick a large snapping turtle up like this by the sides of its shell here. They have deceptively long necks, and if you had a really feisty turtle, it could reach around and try to bite your hands. The best place to grab it is always right at the very back of the turtle. At the back of his shell, they have almost perfect little handles here where you can pick up the turtle and move it across the road. Or you can grab the turtle by the rear of the shell, spin him around, and gently slide him across the pavement. And when you get to the other side, you turn him back in the direction that he was facing. Now if the turtle's small enough and you're comfortable with lifting it, you can lift it right up, walk it across the road, and set it down on the other side. If you have a very large turtle that you can't lift, the best thing is to do is just grab the back of its shell and literally slide it across the pavement. This could scratch the turtle a little bit, but they are reptiles, they have tough scaly skin, and they can handle it if it means it's going to save its life from being hit by cars. Now if you're not comfortable with handling a turtle at all, there are a few other methods that you could use to help a snapping turtle across the road. One thing is a car mat. This is something that everyone should have in their car and can be quite practical for helping a turtle cross the road. So if you place the turtle on the car mat, again, just like the sliding technique, you can use the mat to slide the turtle across the roadway and then turn him around in the direction he was facing. The next one you can use is perhaps you have an old bed sheet in your trunk. Same as the mat, you can get the turtle onto the sheet and use the sheet to slide the turtle across the roadway. Remember, when you get to the other side, turn him around and face him in the direction he was heading. Or sometimes you might find it easier just to turn around and find something in the bush nearby, like this piece of wood. Prop it underneath your turtle, and use it to help you slide the turtle across the road to the other side.
Fantastic. Okay. So again, just to recap, only if it's safe for you to do so, do you help it across the road. Help them in the direction they're going. Even if you don't agree with it, that's where they're going to go anyways, even if you try to tell them to go back the way they came. And if it's a smaller turtle, like a painted turtle, very simple, pick it up, place it a few meters off of the road, facing in its original direction. If it's bigger, like a snapper, drag it, push it, get it onto an old shower curtain, an old towel, a car mat, a shovel, whatever you've got. I'd rather it get a bit scratched up instead of killed. And what else can you do? The list is long, and I've tried to pare it down to just these sentences that are on this slide. Clearly, this is not an exhaustive slide. I do encourage people to volunteer your time, volunteer like physical resources, volunteer your money, volunteer your abilities with the Hamilton Naturalist Club, Royal Botanical Gardens, Dundas Turtle Watch, the Bay Area Restoration Council, the neighboring conservation authorities, Environment Hamilton, et cetera, et cetera. There's loads of organizations ultimately helping them. If it helps the habitat, it helps the turtles. Remove, prevent, limit, manage invasive species, and that includes planting native species instead of non-native species, because let me tell you, it's typically invasive species that are taking over the turtle nesting piles rather than the native species. I'd ask that you please, keep your dog food indoors. Don't feed raccoons and squirrels, etc. Even feeding the birds. When you get, I can understand a small handful of seeds, but we get people that will come in and dump piles of seeds. And it's the skunks and raccoons that come by to eat those piles later. And those guys are turtle nest predators. You're helping them, you're hurting the turtles. It's the raccoons and the skunks, they're adorable, yes, but they don't need our help the way the turtles and the way the turtles do. Keep wildlife in the wild where it belongs. I do not want Shimmy to have any other friends end up with him from Long Point or any other marshes. I sincerely hope that it isn't people doing it on purpose, this relocating of turtles, thinking that they're helping. Trust me, you are not. There are other ways to help rather than kidnapping turtles from somewhere else. And of course, reduce landfill growth. Buy less, buy local. Animals and habitat are damaged from manufacturing and disposal and transporting of things. And please encourage others to do the same. And that's about it. So I could literally talk for hours about turtles, and I could go in every which direction because verbal diarrhea is one of my strong points, but I would rather answer any questions that people have and see if I can help with any questions.
Anybody wants to ask a question, just click on the Q&A button at the bottom and you can type in your answer, or you just raise your hand, click the raise hand button, and they can open your mic. And you can talk. No questions? Must be
no questions?
everybody.
Oh, there's some people raising their hands.
There it is. Okay. And, yeah.
This is where I wish Brittany was with me and I could find out how it is I view the chat part. Oh, here we are.
Hi. Hi, it's Dina. And my question is there any work being done at Grimsby Wetlands on turtles? I go bird watching there and I see many turtles there, and painted turtles, and also I think I've seen a snapping turtle. Are you aware of any work being done identifying or tagging them?
I'm sorry, where was this at again?
Grimsby Wetlands.
In the Grimsby Wetlands.
Yeah.
I am not immediately aware off of the top of my head of any work that's going on there. That sadly, the kind of work that I have the privilege of doing is not commonly done because capitalism, conservation does not make money. And there's very few organizations that are able to dedicate any resources to turtle conservation. Places like Toronto Zoo, RBG, Upper Thames River Conservation Authority, Orillia, Scales Nature Park, the Ontario Turtle Conservation Centre, formerly known as the Kawartha Turtle Trauma Centre. But most places don't have the physical capacity to do so, especially places like conservation authorities or places that occur on city or private land. It's largely up to, there's been a lot accomplished by really fantastic dedicated volunteers that are able to sometimes get support and assistance from other experts in order to figure out how best to address that. I would hope that there is some work being done at other wetlands, but largely it's very piecemeal and not as broadly applied as I would like it to be.
Thank you.
So you can, depending on where in those Grimsby wetlands, I'm not particularly familiar with the boundaries of which conservation authority that might fall within. So that could be the Niagara Peninsula Conservation Authority, that could be the Hamilton Region Conservation Authority. You could contact them and they may be able to answer that question better than I can.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Debbie and Dennis, do you want to ask a question, or did you already posted in the Q&A?
Sorry, I couldn't hear that.
I've opened the mic to Debbie and Dennis, so turn the mic off. Yeah, I think they put it in the Q&A. Okay, so we'll just see.
Oh, it says, just wanted to mention turtle sighting location shouldn't be described in face. Oh, that's another great. Thank you, Debbie and Dennis. Thank you. That is something I neglected to. That might have been one of the things I accidentally erased while I was trying to trim down my presentation. Yes, definitely. One of the key things about helping keep turtles safe is keeping their location off books. So while people know that turtles can be found in wetlands, that's where turtles are going to be found. But generally speaking, if you ever see a turtle on land at and around RBG, please do report it. You can contact RBG directly through you can send a message to like privately to our Instagram, or to our Facebook or our Twitter. You could call the main center. You could even email, and it might end up with me, not necessarily in a timely fashion because I'm not checking my email every moment of every day, but generally speaking, even outside of business hours, I will get messages from the staff we have monitoring our social media, and they'll let me know that someone has reported a turtle sighting on land. But of course, we ask that people, whatever they see, that they not broadcast that on social media with the location information. And that is because of things like, you wouldn't think that happens here, but it does. We've had people steal our covered nests, not just the covers. They literally ripped up the cover, stole the eggs, and then replaced the cover. And we didn't realize that had happened until in October when I went to investigate the nest, wondering why it hadn't hatched. Typically, if it was a predated nest, I'd see broken eggshells everywhere, but instead the nest cavity was completely empty. And it had definitely had eggs in it because I went to confirm that there were eggs in it before installing the nest cover. We've also had, just this year, we had instances of some city workers contacted us, City of Hamilton workers told us that they had stopped some people who were collecting turtles at Bayfront Park. And when asked what they were doing with the turtles, the people said in very broken English, they were taking them home to eat them. There was a turtle that I was contacted by the Heart Lake Turtle Troopers, which is another turtle conservation group starting up in Ontario. And they contacted me because some idiot grabbed a baby painted turtle from the Rose Garden in Hendry Park, close to the main center. And they took it home and they kept it for a couple years. And then they brought it it was brought up to the Ontario Turtle Conservation Center, where they then they've had it in their care since April because it was so horribly malnourished. And it had finally been brought out of the danger zone, and it was able to be released back into its regular habitat back at RBG. And those are just people that came across it by accident. But people who are poachers, people who want to make a quick buck, and that's everywhere from Kijiji to Craigslist to other forums. We have had reports of a father and his son who were catching turtles and frogs and snakes and selling them on Kijiji. In general, we don't want to make it easier for the poachers because they will troll those social media posts, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, iNaturalist. If you make a posting, you can on iNaturalist, you can do what's called obscure the location. Like when you click on geoprivacy and it gives you the options of open or obscured or hidden. Obscure just gives it a random point somewhere within a large radius. And you can be generic. Maybe you've saved a turtle and you are so pleased and happy that you've done so, and you can't wait to share that information on whatever platform. Well, you don't have to say, I just released a map turtle into this pond at this spot. You can say, I just released it in Hamilton. That's specific. That's as specific as you need get. If you're posting something, of course, if you're reporting information, we need as specific information as possible, clearly. But yeah, please do not include the specific location information on any sort of public posting, because even as much as you might trust the people who you're sharing that information with, I actually had someone, they meant well, but because there was someone who worked with us a few years back, and they shared a picture of Blanding's turtles that we had released, and that person shared that photo with their younger sister, who then posted it online with the location information. And that person didn't know that his little sister had done that, and he didn't mean for her to do it, but because you don't know what other people are going to do with the information, and you really don't know who's overhearing you. I've literally gotten turtle reports because I was in line at Easterbrooks, overhearing what other people were talking about. If I can overhear that, so can somebody who wants to make a quick buck on wildlife that really can't handle being poached or stolen for anyone's backyard pond or online forum. So thank you, Debbie and Dennis, for bringing that up. Thank you so much.
Mike Rowland's question or next?
Okay, so Michael Rowland's question, I see. Did the turtles that traveled large, can I move? Oh, there we go. The turtles that traveled large distances within RBG go overland or via Grindstone Creek? My guess is Grindstone Creek. Unfortunately, the way that radio telemetry works is you get a documentation of that point in time. You don't get the history of the path they took to get there. In order to get the history of the path they took to get there, I would need satellite transmitters that would record that information. And boy, are those expensive. Like my predecessor got a private grant submitted to her, and I think it was $2,500 for one satellite transmitter to get the information of where this turtle was traveling. So for now, we're sticking with the radio telemetry, and that will give us a point in time. But frankly, a lot of those ones that we found out where they were, those weren't from radio telemetry. Those were from just the notches and people reporting to us, there's a turtle on the road at Valley Inn. There's a turtle that we just saved off the road over here. And then we go and report, we go and respond to that and find out, hey, it's notched, and hey, check it out. The last time this one was notched was in 2019, over a kilometer away. So cool. Of course, the painted turtle that traveled that short distance in 2 days definitely traveled over land. There was no water for her to traverse, and Lord knows how she got up over the curb. But when I did walk that spot along the south edge of Plains Road West along the main center, I could see the only spot where she could have gone. So it's likely that Grindstone Creek is sort of the EAC, if anyone is familiar with Finding Nemo, that would act as a highway. They would certainly use that as a quick means of transportation. And it's actually some of the Blanding's turtles that we've tracked in the past would vault a very far distance in a very short period of time. And really the only way that they could have done so was by using the creek rather than overland. They swim a lot faster than they walk. And oh, there's a message here from anonymous attendee. Why am I the greatest? I'm very flattered. Thank you. Diane Seed asks, some of the ponds in Lamb's Hollow area at RBG are dried up. how does this impact the turtles? Used to see so many there, but none sunning themselves lately on logs. So when turtles and reptiles in general, they spend a lot of their time thermoregulating, which means keeping their body temperature within a suitable range that is optimal for whatever it is they need to do. If they need to be within certain range optimal for incubating eggs versus feeding versus growing versus hiding versus etc. But turtles will thermoregulate not just on land, they can also thermoregulate in water if the water temperature is suitable. So you'll notice that in general, you don't tend to see snapping turtles basking on logs. They will, it's not that they're not allergic to basking out of water, but they, as well as map turtles, will do what's called aqua basking. They will just hang out at the water's surface and splay out their legs and soak up some sun that way. And they're able to do that if the water temperature is suitable enough for them to do so. If they're in water that is too cold to make for suitable aquabasking, then they will need to leave the water and find a rock or tree limb or something that they can further warm up on. And you'll note that basking activity does tend to peak in areas, at times of the year, such as May, especially because the female turtles especially are essentially incubating eggs. They're working on creating eggs for June. So later on in the season, they might only need to bask so much for getting enough energy to go look for food or to make it to their overwintering habitat. Especially though, in general, the warmer it gets, air temperature as well as water temperature, the less necessary it is for a turtle to have to leave the water to bask. So seasonally, there are areas that definitely do dry up later in the year, and then early in the spring, maybe they'll receive rainwater runoff or snowmelt runoff, and there'll be a pond or a wet area. And then, of course, as the summer progresses, that area will dry up. And that can be something that's actually sort of beneficial as well, especially for amphibian populations. Guys like frogs and salamanders, they do far better in temporary bodies of water because fish cannot survive in those. And fish love to eat salamander eggs and frog eggs. So having temporary bodies of water is actually necessary for a number of creatures to survive. Ideally, they last long enough so that things can use them for whatever purpose they need. But that's also one of the things that makes wetlands so important, is that wetlands, all the different types, so there's ones that are seasonal and there's ones that are permanent. And guys like Blanding's turtles, they need huge wetland complexes, areas that they can move in between. They spend 50% of their time on land, 50% of their time in the water, and some of that time on land is basking, and other times it's foraging for food. But they need areas that are temporary, without fish, or without other dangerous things that they might get exposed to cool down in, or to essentially be these little safe harbors in between the larger permanent wetlands. So temporary water is very normal on a landscape. What we have seen is it does tend to cause the turtles to wander a bit more. Back during that super low water time, was that 2021 or was that 2020? I think it was 2021. And we had a bunch of turtles showing up in an area that they had never really been before. And it was following the drying up of a number of other areas, and the water had all moved to this other spot because a beaver had created a dam in a large pond. So all the turtles said, well, this is the only spot that's wet, I'm going to go hang out here. So, and that beaver dammed area has since been removed because clearly municipalities don't like beaver dams. And the turtles have now returned to the spot once the water returned. So you're used to seeing a lot of them sunning themselves, and you will see them sunning there again, but it's late in the season, so they're not needing to bask so much to conduct the energy intensive process of creating eggs and going to a nesting site. If anything, we'll still be seeing them basking. I've seen turtles basking cripes right even into early November, depending on the temperatures. But yeah, keep your eyes open in April and May and June, and you'll see them bask in their spots again. And another message from Debbie and Dennis: are there plans to introduce other Blanding's turtles to Diversify? Yes, well, the head starting efforts are continuing. We're fortunate enough to submit 3 clutches in 2021, last year. So this year we released 4 Blanding's turtles, total from head starting efforts from, they were the survivors from clutches collected in 2020. And the clutches that were collected last year will be released next year. And the clutches we submitted for head starting this year will be released 2 years from now. And those are from those females that are in this area. I do want to talk to the permitting authorities about maybe doing a switch, but I'd have to get permission for that because legally I'm required to return the babies to the water body closest to where their mother came from, so that, or likely closest to wherever they were laid, so that it makes sense, because then if they hadn't been predated, that's where they likely would have migrated to. It's to mimic as close as possible a natural setting. Oh, I see, yeah, to diversify the gene pool. Yes, because I am concerned about the gene pool. And I have been in contact with a Dr. Christine Davis about the genetics of the Blandings turtles here at RBG, because being able to retrieve clutches from females so reliably every few years, we've been noting that even after we control for things like temperature and substrate and collection technique, we're still ending up with the same deformities in the hatchlings year after year from the same females, which indicates it's likely genetic. And we've also had some instances, more than my fair share, what feels like, is instances of complete clutch failures where babies will be produced and then they will pip the egg, like just barely break the egg and then die. And, or we'll have a whole clutch of eggs on multiple occasions now, whole clutches of eggs, and 1 or 2 of them are fertilized and the rest are empty. Which could be a sign of not very good sperm or not very good, maternal genetics. It could be that the female used old sperm, because Blandings turtles are actually able to retain sperm from a prior mating like the year before. And it's theorized that older sperm will likely result in not as great of a success rate. There's a lot of work that would need to be done there. Like that would be a master's or PhD level project. I'd love to be able to do, if anyone, any wealthy benefactors out there, if you could please, sponsor someone if they wanted to do a family tree on the Blandings turtles here at RBG, so that we could find out how best to support this population into a future that is more genetically secure. That would be fantastic, because there was actually a study I read of some people studying gopher tortoises down, was it Florida, Georgia, somewhere like that. And it was a very small population. They essentially conducted a family tree study on them and found that of the 12 clutches of eggs that they collected from this very highly endangered tortoise population, they found 7 of them were fathered by the same male. Now, while reptiles, to my knowledge, are able to sustain some levels of inbreeding more so than mammals, it's still in general not healthy for a population to have to sustain any levels of that. So yes, I'm worried, because right now we've only got, to my knowledge, 1 female in all of Coots, and it's only her babies that I can release into the wetland. So it's up to us to get the eggs from her to replenish Coots' population. Hopefully in future we can revisit maybe bringing in some outside genetics, but that would have to be conducted in concert with studies and consultation with all of the right biologists who know a lot more about genetics than I do. Another message from an anonymous attendee: for iNaturalist observations of turtles on RBG property, would you recommend obscuring all turtle observations or just those found on land? I would recommend that of course, it would depend on the species. I mean, if you take a picture of a painted turtle in Hamilton Harbor, it's a large wet area, turtles are likely to be there. But say you take a picture of a Blandings turtle and you showcase exactly where it is, and it's a spot that somebody is, maybe you showed a picture of it nesting, and it's a spot that someone's going to be able to determine where that is according to what might be included in the photo, like perhaps an address or a particular landmark or a building. Because there are things I've been able to figure out from pictures that people posted on iNaturalist, even though they obscured the location. And if I can do it, so can somebody else who has more nefarious intentions than I do. So I would recommend obscuring turtle observations. And then if you are approached by somebody who needs more information on that turtle, and they can prove that they are someone who's a legitimate researcher and not someone who's a little shady, then you could share that location information with them. So there's also iNaturalist's default where it will automatically obscure the location of species at risk, but generally not always of the ones that are special concern. to my knowledge. I'll have to double check that actually. I do know they automatically obscure locations of Blandings turtles. So of course you want to make sure that there's no identifying location information in the photo. A message from Heather Yole. Have you seen an effect of weather conditions on egg viability? I am wondering whether excess heat or drought reduces hatching and whether watering nests during a drought might be beneficial. There's a lot to unpack there. Watering nests is, so typically, no, if there's, when we retrieve eggs, we keep them in specific moisture conditions because we have retrieved them from the nest cavity. We've disrupted the microclimate that's within that nest cavity by us retrieving the eggs because they were laid beside a parking lot or on a service road. If you don't disturb that nest cavity, you don't dig it up, you don't disturb, you leave that nest cavity be, in all likelihood, it is actually, it's on with a protector in place, it should be fine. The turtles, generally speaking, instinctively dig deep enough to keep their young safe from a super hot day. Or if anything, at least subject to it enough that they are still going to be incubated but not killed. There's always, of course, exceptions to that. There's the occasional nest that's not dug deep enough, and those babies might die from frost if they're the kind that overwinter in the nest. There are nests I've encountered that erosion caused them to become much more shallow, and they were suddenly subject to more things like foot traffic and parasitic flies. Watering nests during a drought, it should not be necessary. Typically, what we have observed is that, well, of course, there is the temperature effects of nests. There are some species like snapbug, actually all the species we have at RBG of turtles, certain temperatures are actually necessary in order to produce the hatchlings. Higher temperatures tend to produce females, lower temperatures tend to produce males, and that's nature's way of ensuring an even sex ratio. You've got the ones at the top of the nest, the eggs at the top of the nest that will receive more warmth because they're close to the sun, and those will be the females, and the ones at the bottom, if they're receiving cooler temperatures, those will be the males. And if it's snapping turtles or stink pots, there's a whole other level of temperature that I won't get into. Watering the nest shouldn't be necessary. If anything, you might actually end up drowning the eggs if you overdo it. So excess heat, though, has been found. There's been some preliminary research that's showing climate change is actually producing nothing but females in sea turtles in the tropical climates. And there's been concerns about what that might translate to with higher temperatures up here in the temperate zone. So in general, protecting the nest is good. Watering the nest should not be necessary, no. Janet Sproat, will you be giving your email address? I would like to have a conversation with you about a number of snapping turtle nests that came upon this past May. I also have pictures of 2 females nesting in this area. I return to this area daily to monitor the nests. Most were lost to predators. Sure. Where did I not include my email address on it? I didn't. Oh no. Sorry. Let me just zoom up here. Aha. Can people still see that? I think I'm still sharing my screen. Yeah, so my email address, it's sriche@rbg.ca, spelled sricher@rbg.ca. Does RBG have special facilities for incubation of turtle eggs? I will neither confirm nor deny. I can say that we use equipment that has been required by and approved by the Wildlife Animal Care Committee protocol that we submit and get approved in order to obtain our Wildlife Scientific Collector's Authorization Permit. It is definitely not something you want to just, do not stick them in your oven. That this is not the sort of thing you want to just do willy-nilly. And there is a J Musk. Is there any chance that a snapping turtle is laying some of her eggs in one spot and laying the rest in another spot? That's a curious question because I have had instances, it's not common at all. The fact that I've only actually ever seen it twice, where a turtle, in both times though it was painted turtles, they laid a nest and they were heavily disturbed by visitors because these poor turtles were laying in the middle of a very busy popular garden, and they dug a hole, they laid eggs, and then they buried the hole, and then they walked away a few feet and then did it again and laid another 1 or 2, like 2 eggs, which is unusual. I have not seen that in snapping turtles. To my knowledge, pretty much once they dig and lay, they can't stop laying any more than a human female could stop giving birth. Or at least that's the thing, is that's what I thought was the case. And then I witnessed that painted turtle do it. So I don't think it's common. I can't say whether or not it's possible with snapping turtles. I can say it's highly unlikely. In general, They are a one-shot deal. Cavity, eggs, berry, leave. Yes. Okay. Are there any other questions?
Seem like it.
Okay, well, thank you everyone so very much for listening to me jabber on about one of my favorite critters. And again, if you are ever on or around RBG land outside of wintertime and you see a turtle on land, or you see a predated nest, or you help a turtle across the road, or you're too late for one, whatever it is, please share that information because it is super helpful, and not just for the turtles, but for me too.